This story begins and ends like most others, with some kind of psychosis, which is exactly what falling in love is, a form of insanity experienced in varying degrees and durations. I didn't grow up as a cross-dresser. It doesn't exactly scream looking for a husband, and it might border slightly towards looking for a wife instead. But I'm neither. I chase stories that answer my questions, pique my interest, stimulate my imagination, inspire me to aspire, encourage me to believe, and occasionally warn me of the outcomes I don't want to live. I've moved around a fair bit, which is why everything I have can be viewed as a form of souvenir. All of it can be fit into a 30 square meter room or less, and quickly relocated, so I can basically move my entire world around. The first instrument I ever wanted to learn was the piano. I didn't like the idea of Santa Claus when I was growing up. My mother told me my name was something she got from a book she read as a young girl. Some story about a heroine. I never found the book she mentioned, though. The only name I've ever read similar to my own is in Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. The character never actually appears in the story, is male, and is despised by the main person. It's an interesting bit, but that still leaves the origin of my name a complete enigma to me. Thanks, Mom. Let's start out with a definition of love. It can roughly be divided into three categories: desire, friendship, and companionship. This is one of the oldest topics in human history because it is an implied element in every relation known to man. Freud's psychosexual theory was developed as a means to cure female hysteria, a term introduced in 1801 when the concept was already present in antique Greek society. The Greek doctor Hippocrates described it as the woman's wandering womb through the body, causing many of women's physical and psychological ailments, along with unaccepted forms of behavior. Hysteria was seen as inversion symptoms, meaning a result of suppressed sexual urges. A critical female psychoanalysts apply more emphasis on a lack of opportunities for self-realization. Hysteria was used as a general diagnosis for several female symptoms from circa 460 BC to 1995, when it was discontinued as a viable diagnosis and when the women's rights movement was becoming more recognized in the U.S. Kraft Ebing, who published Psychopathia Sexualis, meaning sexual dysfunctions, in 1886, was convinced that any behavior outside of the Christian monogamous state was a sign of illness, and viewed women as subordinate beings whose social standing was elevated to equality through marriage. According to Freud, aggression is caused by a lack of sexual release, which could be released by a substitute target. This is a method he called catharsis. Catharsis is the aim of theater, a tradition passed down and developed through religious practice. The practice of satisfying the unfulfilled needs or desires of the spectator. Read voyeurism, as handed down to us Aristotle's Poetics, on which we have based the majority of our current communicational and analytical methods of understanding. In ancient Greece, women could be divided into three categories: citizens, foreigners, and slaves. Hetero was a term used to describe a group of educated foreign women, the majority of which were mistresses of a citizen. These were the only class of women who could move freely without harm, including the political functions of male society that wives were excluded from. Democracy was reserved for a group of men who made up around 10% of the population. Foreigners and slaves had no rights in this society. A citizen was considered in their own right to do with them as they pleased, the only exception being murder. Thankfully, there is historical evidence of alternative female characters as early as 2354 BC. These women were all philosophers and recognized by their communities as such. And despite the lack of public mention of their influence on human history, women of our time can look to them as examples of strength that reaches beyond mere biological function. They were not considered cattle, whereas slaves in ancient Greece and in Rome were considered obligated to participate in full or part-time prostitution. The segregation between the three classes has always been defined by women's social standing in relation to men, so the women's movement can only be seen as an inevitable consequence of a general accepted inequity that causes poverty and suffering, or more directly, negative social heritage. Regardless of the culture in question, yet based on the idea of one or multiple gods, female sexuality and identity has always been a matter of control and or punishment. The ancient Vikings drugged, murdered, and buried female slaves who accompanied their masters in death. In the Old Testament, they condemned raped women to death by stoning. During the 15th to 17th centuries, circa 9 million women died during the witch trials. More than 125 million girls and women alive today have undergone female genital mutilation in the countries where the practice is concentrated. An estimated 3 million girls at risk of undergoing female genital mutilation every year. The majority are cut before they turn 15 years old. Some countries practice arranged marriages of girls as young as 8. The majority are married off before the age of 18 and denied further schooling when engaged. Women and children account for the majority of human trafficking. At each stage, women, men, and children may encounter psychological, physical, and or sexual abuse, forced or coerced use of drugs or alcohol, social restrictions, and emotional manipulation, economic exploitation, inescapable debts, and legal insecurities. Risks often persist even after a person is released from the trafficking situation, and only a small portion of people reach post-trafficking services or receive any financial or other compensation. The effects include fatigue, headaches, sexual and reproductive health problems, back pain, and significant weight loss, along with persistent mental health problems, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, suicidal tendencies, and somatic conditions. In short, it is a practice that produces all the symptoms of hysteria. Nietzsche's character of the madman claimed that God is dead and that we have killed him. Additionally, he divided people into two separate mentalities, the slave and master mentality. His words were later on abused to justify the genocide of Jews by an ideology that did not only support but favor racism and actively indoctrinate an entire generation of youth to polarized gender roles that confined women to home life and created a patriarchal and fascist structure of society, the consequence of which has given rise to what we call the working poor today. The very same ideology took advantage of physicist Metzger's work to later on create the atom bomb, has caused further destruction and misery. Poverty and suffering has created all the opportunity to fuel war, exploitation, and genocide, the effects of which we are still experiencing as we discuss the issues of terrorism, refugees, human trafficking, as well as the safety of modern liberty and democracy. But at the heart of these matters lies the values and reflections of the individual, which are largely based on antique perceptions. As long as women and men are not given an equal stand on a global scale, we will continue to watch the patterns of negative social inheritance inflict their havoc in our family structures, relationships, and political arenas. For the vision of a democracy to exist, the political spectrum needs to be representative, and women are the final frontier of this public relationship.